The Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Don't store up earthly treasures for yourselves, which moths and rust destroy and thieves can break in and steal. But store up treasures for yourself in heaven, where neither moth nor rust can destroy them and thieves cannot break in and steal them. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be as well. The lamp of the body is the eye. If your eye is sound, your whole body will be filled with light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be in darkness. And if the light inside you is darkness, how great that darkness will be. No one can serve two superiors. You will either hate one and love the other, or be attentive to one and despise the other. You cannot give yourself to God and money. And from the Gospel according to Thomas. Jesus said, "The way of the heaven is like a certain woman who was carrying a jar full of meal. While she was walking on the road, still some distance from home, the handle of the jar broke, and the meal emptied out behind her on the road. She did not realize it. She had noticed no accident. When she reached her house, she set down the jar and found it empty." Holy wisdom, holy words. Thanks be to God.
Well, it has been said that my stewardship sermons are some of the worst stewardship sermons that people have ever heard. And I think that's in some ways true. I was raised in a church and in a culture where I just didn't trust that claim that when you give to the church, you're giving to God. There just seems something a little shady about that to me. And when a minister is getting paid for the money that's being asked for, I feel like there's a conflict of interest. That seems. And after having sat where you're seated throughout my youth, I still have like chips on my shoulder on your behalf that you not hear the same kinds of things that that made me so indignant when I was young. You may not have the same neuroses I have, so this may not be a problem for you. But I just don't think Jesus was saying what a lot of the church has said on his behalf. So this will be a stewardship sermon. You may not be able to tell that very easily. But in my mind it is. One huge problem is every day that I get older, I'm more of a socialist and more of an anti-capitalist. Every day that I breathe and live, I hate capitalism more. I believe that there's not a problem facing us as a species that's going to be solved within the limited constraints, which doesn't mean it doesn't have some good things there that we'll be able to strip, like hubcaps here or there, and rip off an antenna. But it boils down to this. Is our context of values coming primarily from property rights and what maximizes profits on a ledger? Or is it based on human needs, human rights, what the planet needs, what animals need, what plants need? And I think we have to choose. I think that's what Jesus is saying. You can't serve the sacred and greed. Right? They're different economic systems. Ecological understanding is different than capitalism. And I think that Jesus, from day one, was asking us to choose. It wasn't called capitalism at the time. It was a different framework. But I think capitalism is expressing those value systems that have been a problem for humankind since the golden calf. if not before. I spent this week in Washington, D.C., and thank you for that. This is a church that is so generous with its time. Austin Sanctuary Network paid for everything, but this is a church that lets me do that, and in fact encourages me to do that, which is very rare. It's incredibly generous with its time, and I consider that to be stewardship. But Washington, D.C. is a manifestation of this capitalistic framework. The airline that you fly is a manifestation. When they got like first class, second class, what's that about? You know, when there's a little red carpet for some of the people. I got to be in Group 1, which is the second time in my life I've been in the Zone 1 or whatever. So I just went around to the other people in the airport and said, if you keep working hard, you can be in Zone 1. Please profit from my example. But what you realize when you're there is it's not really about liberal conservative. Both of those polarities are within the capitalist system. They're on the same continuum. And when the continuum is the problem, choosing between the mean bully and the nice bully isn't going to get out of the problem, kind of thing. I felt St. Andrews in my heart. I felt Ilda and Yvonne in my heart. As I went through these Roman buildings and realized that the story didn't begin when Ilda hit our border. It began when this country destabilized her country for the profit motive. Both sides of the political aisle were fine with that. To realize that when they got here, they were both put in detention camp, for profit detention camp, and both sides were fine with that. That the person determining whether they would get out or not was profiting by them not getting out. Think of being in that place. What's more medieval than a for-profit prison? What's less democratic? What's less human than a for-profit prison? And then some months back, Ilda gets a $300,000 fine. I think 8 other people around the country, all women, receive this very threatening note. And I think when that happens, you kind of have to choose, right? You want to be a moderate within that system? Did there come a time in Germany where moderation wasn't really an option? Where compromising with what was happening in the country meant betraying other people, other human rights? And that you really had to choose between serving power and property and special rights and the very web of life. I believe it's not going to be enough to choose between neoconservative and neoliberal. The neoconservative, that's Bush and that group. They'll always find an enemy and empty the public coffers into the weapons makers. That's one strategy of capitalism. The other strategy is the neoliberal, which is to play off your desires, to make you an entrepreneur, to use the rhetoric of diversity and liberalism to empty the same coffers. You do tax breaks for the rich, and then a few years later you say, well, we have to have austerity measures. We have to shut down the public sector because we don't have enough money. Well, you had the money before you gave it to the rich. I'm sure Obama's a great person. What was the first thing he did in office? Send the money to the banks. He was called a socialist, but I don't think socialists do that. So Jesus is talking about clearing the eye out. And in some translations of the different mystical texts of the time, it's about whether the eye is single or not, whether it can see the wholeness of things, whether it lives in the whole, or whether it lives in factions, if it's on this side or that side of a political aisle. I made a list this morning, it's not complete. The trances of capitalism. The first trance of capitalism is that we can live in an artificial value system and not destroy the balance of nature. Think about it. If all of our values are based on artificial ledger balancing, how is that going to not destroy the balance of nature? Second trance is that we can get rich on interest without impoverishing others unjustly. Number three, that we can base our lives on a system that rewards competition and selfishness without eventually being ruled by our very worst members of the society. And fourth, that we can have rich and poor without needing violence to protect the haves from the have-nots. When you think about it, these things are inevitable. But once you're in the system, you can't see it anymore because you're part of it. And you're a part of a machine that's hurting the people. And it's not that you don't care, but you feel helpless. You feel separate. You don't know what to do. That's our conversation today. Not just politically, but in personal relationships, psychologically. How do we step out of the mechanical view of our time and find our own hearts? That's what Jesus is going to do. This system traumatizes us. We're all trauma victims trying to come to terms with things. I still have stress dreams over my grade school classes. You ever had things where you're late to a class or you're not ready for a test? How long has it been? How deep is that wound? Think of being taught as a child that you were a failure if you didn't humiliate your friend in a spelling bee. If you didn't prove you were better in the science fair. That if you had solidarity with human relationships, you were a failure. That's capitalism. That is not education. Right? That's competition. It's degrading of humankind. Who knows if some of the opioid problems that we have, the drug problems, the suicide problems, are sensitive people who just can't be cogs in a machine. They just shut down. So I think that this issue is very profound and very deep. Einstein supposedly said, this is one of those wonderful fake quotes of Einstein that are so inspiring. He probably would never recognize it, but says, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. See, don't get lost in the numbers of an economic system. Don't get lost in artificial rewards, trophies, promotions, those sorts of things. When I was in Washington, I was actually in Pelosi's office when the announcement came down about the impeachment, which kind of blew us out of the water a little bit. We had a press conference after that, and there was, of course, no press there. We're going to have a press conference. A comet's going to hit the earth and destroy us all, but we're going to do this thing. And but one of the great moments of the week was leaving Pelosi's office with the guns and the police, and this is power. And then going to the office of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who somebody, I won't name, said she doesn't have constituents. They said it's just this little group of women who have no real power. Outside her door, on 20 feet on either side, from the bottom of the floor to the ceiling, are stick-on notes where people have written to thank her for standing up for them. Now see, that's power. It's not money. It's not vested power. It's not corporate power. But that moves mountains. That changes the equation. And that's what people don't see coming. There's a new day. There's a new dawn. And when you walk around the offices and you see an office full of bright young people of color working, being able to give their gift. See, something has changed. When you go to an office and they're all women, bright young women, getting a chance to show who they are, you know that something is being born, even though it's not obvious yet, even though right now it looks really bad in many ways, that something is happening. When Jesus taught in parables, he was trying to help us see the dynamics that drive human affairs. When you see the word heaven in the New Testament, that's not talking about the traditional idea of a place in the sky. It's much more like the Taoist idea. There's something that steers life. There's something that if we get in tune with, can give us wisdom and direction. It's within the nature of things. So this is how Matthew says it. Jesus wants to break the spell that people are under. So he does something very interesting to begin his teaching. He takes his disciples away from church, away from their businesses, away from their routines, takes them out to the Sea of Galilee, out in the countryside, and says, look for yourself. Look at those birds up there. Are they working right now? Do they labor? Do they gather in barns? Then why are you? Now see, they're not going to be able to just jettison out of the system. They're going to live the rest of their lives in the system. But their hearts are going to get free. Their hearts are going to get free. He says, look at the birds. Look at nature and how that's held together. And I love what Thomas does with that. This is much more Buddhist, because in much of those Eastern traditions, you're not trying to add something to your knowledge base. You're trying to get rid of the trance. It's a windshield wiper. It's clearing up so that you can relate to the reality that's before you. This is the Gospel of Thomas. The kingdom of heaven, he was talking about, this is what heaven is really like. It's like a certain woman who is carrying a jar full of meal. While she was walking on the road, some distance from home, the handle of the jar broke, and the meal emptied out behind her on the road. She did not realize it. She had noticed no accident. When she reached her house and set the jar down, she found it empty. See, her dogma, her habits, whatever it was, the kingdom of heaven, the way it works in our life, is we slowly stop remembering who we thought we were. And it surprises us that we wake up in the present moment, living here and now, in nature, in life, and that's where our sense of wealth then comes from. Rumi, the Sufi poet, says it this way. And again, they're talking about a deep dynamic in life. They're not talking about a place somewhere else. Saying this is in your heart. This is among you. This is within you. When Jesus says the kingdom is within you, it's saying this is the dynamic that's right there in your life. You're in that. You don't have to search for it. This is the way Rumi says it. An ant hurries along the threshing floor, and with its wheat grain moving between huge stacks of wheat, not knowing the abundance all around. It thinks its one grain is all there is to love. So we choose a tiny seed to be devoted to. This body, one path, or one teacher. Look wider and farther. The ocean pours through a jar, and you might say it swims inside the fish. This mystery gives peace to your longing and makes the road home. Home. In other words, this thing we're looking for is within us. It's not a place we don't have. It's not a place we don't know. It's that interconnectedness, the interwovenness, the life within us, the pulse within us. Jesus taught people to join in community. I don't think it has to be a church, but what he had in mind was a community consecrated to this rebirth, to this awakening. It's like a gymnasium where we learn how to treat other people in a safe environment. It's hard to go out into the world and love everybody because it's dangerous and we don't know them and it's threatening and we shut down. Jesus is saying, gather with like-minded, like-hearted people and begin practicing these principles. Turn the other cheek. Don't call each other names. Share. And see what happens. And in the ancient church, there was a principle of tithing. And it didn't mean what the institutional church says. It's not necessarily 10%. What it's saying is, as you give yourself to life, do it at a rate that harmonizes you to the river of life. Life is change. Life is interconnectedness. So part of life is taking and part of life is giving. Give enough of your life back to the system so that you feel yourself a part. See, this isn't trying to make us feel guilty. It's not trying to make us feel bad. The place where we do it best is on Christmas. And that's not a drag, is it? I mean, there are preachers who can make that into a guilt-inducing thing. Give generously. Don't make Shanna ashamed of you. Now, when you start off as a child, Christmas is about taking, right? It's so exciting because you're not rich, you don't have money. And so the toys are just so exciting. As you get older and older, that gravity shifts. And the joy more and more is about that look of excitement on a child's face. And you would rather give that joy, experience the joy through that other person than through yourself, because you could buy anything you want. But all of a sudden, ice cream tastes better in the mouth of a child. Stepping back and letting that child have the last strawberry gives you more joy. And the spiritual vocabulary, that's the beatitude. That's when your experience isn't coming from things, possessions, controlling. It's a rejoicing at life itself. The same life that's changing and turning. It's giving ourselves to that. That's the true stewardship that I think Jesus is trying to teach us. And we can do it in community. It doesn't have to be community. But that's the way it's presented. Now, I will confess that I have given probably some of the worst stewardship sermons of all time. That's my neuroses. But I also think the institutional church has misunderstood what Jesus is talking about. Because Jesus isn't talking about an institution, he's talking about a movement that changes the world. That isn't just trying to save its soul, it's trying to spend itself on behalf of humankind. And those are very different vocabularies, being saved and finding something to empty yourself into that gives you joy as you do it. When Jesus was teaching the disciples, he took them away from everything that was familiar to them and said, look around you at nature. These animals are not working in the typical sense, but they are fulfilling in this, so they are doing something very noble and very wonderful. Your life can be like that as well. If you don't let yourself be defined by the culture, if you don't value property over life. Life is change. Life is interconnectedness. The irony is when we try to hold it still, we lose it. When you hold your breath, you lose your breath. Again, spoiler alert, you're not getting out of here alive. So piling up stuff and hoarding it is not going to be as exciting an ending as it may seem. But if we've learned this lesson, and we're not holding things back all the time, then we give ourselves back slowly enough where we don't run out of stuff while we're still alive. But we also have the joy of sharing and learning and growing. It starts in community, and we give enough where we can feel our hearts in harmony with the river of life. And we realize that nothing is permanent, nothing is ours, but it could all be a source of joy. So when all is said and done, I think stewardship shouldn't sound like a sermon anyway. It should feel like Christmas. And that's the invitation I think Jesus gives us today. I invite you to your own thoughts on these words.